The house was quiet that evening, too quiet. The ticking of the old clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the living room. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, carrying with it the faint sound of stray dogs barking in the distance. The street lamps outside flickered now and then, throwing shadows through the thin curtains. It was an ordinary night, but it was about to change into something unforgettable. The old woman sat alone on the sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was tired, her body aching after a long day, but her mind was restless. She felt something heavy in her chest, a strange uneasiness she could not explain. Maybe it was her instinct warning her. Maybe it was her heart telling her that something terrible was about to happen. She leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered to herself, "I still remember that night." Her words lingered in the air like a secret, because that was the night when her own daughter-in-law raised her hand against her. That was the night when the house, which once felt like a safe place, turned into a battlefield. The doorbell rang suddenly. The sharp chime cut through the silence, making her jump. She opened her eyes, her heart racing. At this hour. It was late, almost midnight. Who could it be? She slowly rose from the sofa, her knees trembling. She walked toward the door, step echoing across the cold tiles of the floor. When she opened the door, she found her daughter-in-law standing there. Her face was flushed with anger, her eyes wide, her breathing heavy as if she had been running. There was no greeting, no smile, nothing that showed warmth. Only rage. "What's wrong?" the old woman asked softly, her voice shaky. The daughter-in-law pushed past her without permission and stormed into the house. Her sandals slapped loudly against the floor. The old woman closed the door gently, confused, her hands trembling against the knob. Something felt wrong, very wrong, inside. The daughter-in-law stood in the middle of the living room, her chest rising and falling fast. Her eyes darted around, restless, wild. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of the ceiling fan spinning slowly above their heads. Then the shouting began. "Where are the keys?" she demanded, her voice sharp like broken glass. The old woman frowned. "Keys? What keys are you talking about? You know very well." The daughter-in-law snapped. Her voice was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. "The house keys. Give them to me right now." The old woman's heart dropped. She clutched her chest, feeling the thump of her heartbeat. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "This is my house. Why do you need the keys at this time of night?" But her daughter-in-law only grew angrier. Her eyes were burning, her face twisted with frustration. She stepped closer, her voice lowering but colder than ice. "You think you can stop me? You think this house will stay in your control forever? Hand over the keys. Or else." The old woman stepped back. She felt the wall behind her. Her palms were sweating and her throat was dry. She could not believe what she was hearing. She had always treated her daughter-in-law with love and respect, as if she was her own daughter. And now this same woman was standing before her, threatening her, demanding the keys to her home. Her mind began to spin. She remembered the small arguments that had happened before. The rude words, the sharp looks, the way her daughter-in-law sometimes searched the drawers as if looking for something. It all made sense now. She wanted control. She wanted the house. But before the old woman could gather her thoughts, before she could speak again, it happened. The daughter-in-law raised her hand. The old woman froze. Time seemed to slow. She could see the hand coming closer, feel the rush of air, hear the faint whistle of the movement. Her eyes widened in shock and her body tensed. She never thought she would see this day. Never thought a member of her own family would dare do such a thing. The slap came fast, hard and merciless. It echoed in the small living room like a gunshot. The sound bounced off the walls and rang in her ears. The old woman's face stung with pain, her skin burning where the hand had struck. She staggered back, almost losing her balance, her hands flying up to cover her cheek. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from the pain, but from the heartbreak. Her own daughter-in-law had hit her. The keys she had been holding in her hand slipped from her grip. They clattered to the floor. the metallic sound loud in the silence that followed. The daughter-in-law's eyes locked onto them. She bent down quickly, her fingers reaching for the keys with desperation. But the old woman's foot pressed over them. For a second, their eyes met. One filled with rage, the other filled with fear, shock, and sadness. The old woman's chest rose and fell rapidly as she whispered, "This is my house. You cannot take it from me." The daughter-in-law's lips curled into a cruel smile. Her hand twitched as if ready to strike again. The air between them was heavy, thick with unspoken war. The night outside grew darker. The wind howled louder. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked again, but inside the house. The silence was sharp, cut only by the sound of their heavy breathing. And then, the daughter-in-law whispered something under her breath, something the old woman could barely hear. But it was enough to make her blood run cold. It was not just about the keys. It was something bigger, something darker. The old woman's heart thudded louder, fear spreading through her veins. She looked at the woman standing before her and realized this was only the beginning. The slap was not the end. It was just the first strike in a battle she had never wanted. She knew the night was far from over. The slap had left the old woman shaken. But her heart remembered something deeper, the moments that had led to that terrible night. Because this did not happen suddenly. It had begun long before, with little cracks that slowly grew into something dangerous. The old woman sat in her chair by the window, the faint morning light falling across her wrinkled face. Her cheek still stung from the memory of the slap, and her soul ached even more. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, as if telling a story to herself. This did not start last night. No, the signs were there long ago. She remembered the first time her daughter-in-law entered the house. The wedding had been full of music, laughter, and flowers. Everyone had smiled, everyone had blessed the young couple. The bride had looked beautiful in her dress, her face glowing, her voice soft and polite. She had bowed her head and touched the old woman's feet with respect. In those early days, the house was alive with joy. The young woman helped in the kitchen, served food with a smile, and spoke gently to everyone. She laughed with her husband, she joked with neighbors, and the old woman felt grateful. She had thought, "Finally, my son has someone who will care for him. And I have a daughter in this house." But time slowly began to change everything. At first, it was the small things. A cold look instead of a warm smile. A sharp tone when speaking instead of respect. The old woman noticed how the girl sometimes avoided doing small chores, leaving them for her. It was nothing serious, she thought. Maybe just tiredness, maybe adjustment. She told herself not to judge too quickly, but the signs grew stronger. One evening, the old woman was folding clothes in her room when she heard a voice outside. She walked softly to the door and stopped. It was her daughter-in-law speaking on the phone. Her tone was not sweet. It was sharp, almost greedy. "Don't worry," the young woman whispered, her words quick. "Once I have the keys, everything will be under control." The old woman froze. Keys? What keys was she talking about? Her hands tightened around the fabric she was holding. She leaned closer, her ear near the crack of the door. "Yes," the young woman continued, her voice lower now. "She's old. She won't fight for long. The house will be ours." The old woman's breath caught in her throat. Her knees felt weak. She stepped back quickly, her mind racing. Had she heard correctly? Or was it her imagination? No, the words were clear. The house. The keys. That night she could not sleep. The sound of those whispered words kept echoing in her head. She stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the fan spin slowly above, feeling her chest rise and fall in uneven rhythm. Her heart warned her. Something was coming. The next days only proved her fears at dinner. The daughter-in-law no longer waited for the old woman to serve. She helped herself, sometimes even taking the best pieces of food without offering anyone else. Her eyes carried a boldness now, as if she no longer needed to pretend. One afternoon, when the old woman was resting, she heard footsteps in her bedroom. She rose quietly, her feet barely making a sound on the floor. She pushed open the door and found her daughter-in-law pulling open drawers. Her hands searching quickly, her face tense. "What are you doing here?" the old woman asked, her voice cold with surprise. The young woman jumped, startled. She forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed annoyance. "Oh, I was just looking for a pen." "A pen?" The old woman's gaze moved to the half-open drawer where the property papers were kept. "Yes, a pen," the daughter-in-law repeated firmly, closing the drawer quickly and walking out of the room. The old woman stood there for a long time, staring at the drawer. Her hands trembled as she locked it and placed the keys in her pocket. She knew, deep inside, that this was not about a pen. From that day, she began to notice everything. How the daughter-in-law's eyes would follow the keys when she locked a door. How her ears seemed to sharpen whenever the old woman mentioned money or property. How she sometimes whispered to her husband the son but stopped talking whenever the old pate woman entered the room. The house was no longer warm. It was filled with tension, thick like smoke. Every sound seemed louder. The creak of the door, the clang of plates, the footsteps in the hallway at night. The old woman felt like a stranger in her own home, walking carefully, afraid of what she might see or hear next. One evening, while pouring tea into her cup, she noticed her daughter-in-law watching her closely, a faint smirk on her lips. The young woman leaned against the wall and said softly, "You can't keep this house forever. One day, it will be mine." The old woman's hand shook, and hot tea spilled onto her fingers. She bit back a gasp of pain and set the cup down slowly. She did not reply. She just looked into her daughter-in-law's eyes and saw something she had never seen before. Greed. From then on, sleep became difficult. At night, the old woman would lie in bed, staring into the darkness, hearing the faint sounds of movement outside her room. Sometimes a whisper. Sometimes a door closing softly. Sometimes the sound of a drawer being opened. She would clutch her keys tightly in her hand, her only defense, her only shield. Days turned into weeks. And the fear grew inside her. She wanted to tell her son, but every time she tried, he waved her words away. "You're imagining things," he would say. "She's a good woman. You're just old and worried." But the old woman knew the truth. She had seen the look in those eyes. She had heard the whispers on the phone. She had caught her searching the drawers. And one night, as the clock struck 12, she woke up to the sound of footsteps inside her room. She opened her eyes slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast a shadow across the floor. There she was, her daughter-in-law, standing by the bed, her hand hovering near the keys on the table. The old woman's heart pounded in her chest, her hands shaking under the blanket. She wanted to scream, but the words stuck in her throat. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The young woman turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting the old woman's wide, terrified gaze. And then she smiled. The days after that night were heavier than ever. The old woman tried to carry on with her daily life cooking, watering the plants, folding clothes, but her mind never rested. Each time she passed her daughter-in-law in the hallway, each time she heard her footsteps echoing in the house, her chest tightened with dread. What scared her most was not the slap itself, but the quiet waiting. The feeling that her daughter-in-law was planning something, waiting for the right moment to strike again. At the dining table, the silence was thick. The clinking of spoons against plates felt louder than usual. Her son sat quietly, his eyes fixed on his food, never looking up for long. The old woman wanted to speak, to ask him to see what was happening, but her lips felt sealed. She had tried before, and he had only shaken his head. "You're imagining things," he had said. "She loves this family. You're just overthinking." But how could she explain the whispers she had heard? The smile she had seen that night in her bedroom? How could she describe the feeling of someone waiting in the dark for her weakness? The daughter-in-law, however, was not hiding anymore. She had grown bolder. One morning, when the old woman was dusting the shelves in the living room, her daughter-in-law walked in and opened the cupboard without asking. She began searching through it, moving things around roughly. "What are you doing?" the old woman asked, her voice tight. "I'm just looking," she replied casually, not even glancing back. Looking for what? The young woman slammed the cupboard door shut and turned, her eyes sharp. Why do you ask so many questions? This is my house too, isn't it? The old woman felt her chest ache at those words. My house too. No, it wasn't hers. The old woman had built this home with her husband years ago. Every wall, every stone carried memories of their struggle. This was not something to be handed over so easily. But she stayed quiet in the evenings. The daughter-in-law would sit in the living room, staring at the keys whenever the old woman walked past. She didn't speak, but her eyes said enough. The pressure grew with each passing day. During family dinners, the daughter-in-law sometimes made sarcastic comments. It's hard to manage a house when some people refuse to let go of control, she would say with a faint smile as if she were joking. But the old woman could hear the hidden meaning in every word. Her son would look down at his plate, pretending not to notice. His silence cut deeper than the words. The old woman wanted to cry out, to ask him why he never defended her, why he always stayed quiet. But she swallowed her pain and continued eating in silence. One afternoon, while the sun was setting and the sky turned orange outside the window, the old woman went to her room to rest. She sat on her bed, holding the keys tightly in her hand. The metal felt cold against her palm, but it was the only thing that gave her comfort. She closed her eyes, hoping for a few moments of peace, but peace never came. The door creaked open slowly. Her eyes flew open. She turned her head toward the doorway. Her daughter-in-law stood there, leaning against the frame, her arms crossed. Her face calm, but her eyes sharp. What do you want? The old woman asked, her voice trembling. The young woman stepped inside, her sandals tapping against the floor. She didn't answer. She simply walked across the room, her eyes fixed on the keys clutched in the old woman's hand. The old woman's breathing grew heavier. She held the keys tighter, her knuckles turning white. Finally, the daughter-in-law spoke. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of a threat. You know, this can't go on forever. You're old. You should rest. Give me the keys. Let me handle everything. The old woman shook her head slowly. This is my house. As long as I live, the keys will stay with me. For a moment, the young woman said nothing. She just smiled, that same cold smile the old woman had seen before. She leaned closer, her face inches away, and whispered, We'll see. Then she turned and left the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. The old woman sat frozen on the bed, her hand trembling around the keys. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence of the house pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. And that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she knew deep inside something worse was coming. The old woman had lived in that house for decades, but never before had it felt so strange, so heavy with silence. The rooms she once filled with laughter now felt like cages. Every sound seemed louder, the creak of the stairs, the hum of the fridge, even the drip of the old tap in the kitchen. And every sound carried with it a question. Was she watching me? After that night when the daughter-in-law entered her bedroom without knocking, sleep became almost impossible. The old woman would lie awake, clutching the keys in her hand, her ears sharp to every movement in the house. Sometimes she heard soft footsteps outside her door. Sometimes a whisper that seemed to stop the moment she leaned closer. Her daughter-in-law no longer tried to hide her intentions. During the day, she moved around the house with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes often fixed on the old woman. At times, she would pause in the middle of the hallway, just standing, just staring, until the old woman's chest tightened and she had to look away. It was no longer about words. It was the silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than shouting. One evening, as the old woman washed the dishes, she felt a presence behind her. The hairs on her neck rose before she even turned. When she slowly looked over her shoulder, there she was, her daughter-in-law, standing in the doorway, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Do you need something? The old woman asked, her voice low and unsteady. The younger woman smiled faintly and replied, No, nothing. But her eyes stayed locked on the small set of keys hanging from the old Woman's apron. The old woman quickly dried her hands and tucked the keys into her pocket. She turned back to the sink, but her hands were shaking so much she almost dropped a glass. The weight of those eyes on her back felt unbearable. It wasn't just the looks. It was the little things that began to change in the house. The old woman would leave the keys on her bedside table at night, and in the morning she would find them moved slightly from where she had placed them. Once she woke up to discover they were gone completely. Panic rushed through her chest, her breath coming in gasps. She searched under the bed, in the drawers, under the pillow. Nothing. Her heart pounded until she felt dizzy. She gripped the edge of the bed, whispering prayers, terrified. But then, hours later, the keys were back, resting neatly on the table as if they had never been taken. Her hands trembled as she touched them. Who had moved them? She already knew the answer, but her mind refused to accept it. The days blurred into one another, filled with the same strange tension. At family meals, her daughter-in-law no longer even tried to hide her hostility. She would make comments like, "Old people should not hold on to things they cannot manage," or "Some people don't know when to step aside." The son stayed silent, chewing his food, never defending his mother. His silence hurt more than the words. The old woman began locking her bedroom door at night. But even that did not bring peace. She would hear the doorknob rattle softly in the dark, someone trying to open it. Once she even saw the shadow of feet under the door, waiting till her health began to weaken under the pressure. Her hands shook, her eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, and her heart felt fragile, beating too fast with every sudden noise. But she could not let go. The house was her life, her memories, the place where she had built everything with her husband. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the walls, the old woman sat alone in the living room. The lights flickered now and then, shadows dancing across the walls. She held the keys tight in her lap, rocking slightly, whispering prayers to calm herself. Suddenly, she heard a soft sound. A whisper. She froze. It came from the hallway. A voice, low and quiet, carrying through the dark. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew it was her daughter-in-law. The voice was like a snake's hiss, soft yet sharp, like it carried a secret meant only for the darkness. The old woman rose slowly, her knees stiff, and moved toward the hallway. The floor creaked under her weight. She peered around the corner, her breath shallow. Her daughter-in-law was standing there, holding her phone to her ear. The words came clearer now. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll get them soon. She won't be able to stop me." The old woman's heart dropped. But before she could step back, the daughter-in-law turned, her eyes locking on the old woman's face in the dim light. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was heavy, filled with unspoken danger. Then the young woman smiled slowly, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. The old woman's lips parted, but no words came out. She clutched the keys tighter in her hand, her breath uneven. Her daughter-in-law stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "It's only a matter of time. You can't hold on to them forever." She brushed past the old woman and walked into her room, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than thunder. The old woman stood frozen in the hallway, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She knew Naos was no longer just pressure. This was war, and her daughter-in-law would not stop until she had one. The morning after the keys disappeared, the old woman's hands shook as she searched every corner of her bedroom. She pulled open drawers, lifted blankets, and even checked under the bed. Her breath grew short, her chest tight, but no matter where she looked, the keys were gone. Her mind spun in circles. She had fallen asleep holding them, clutching them in her palm. How could they vanish? She pressed her trembling hands against her forehead, whispering prayers, begging for strength. Hours later, when the house grew busy with the sounds of breakfast, she walked into the kitchen. There, sitting neatly on the counter, were the keys. Her daughter-in-law stood near the stove, stirring tea with slow, calm movements. Her lips carried a faint smile, as if she already knew what the old woman had gone through. The old woman picked up the keys with shaky fingers, holding them close to her chest. She wanted to scream, to accuse her, to demand answers, but her voice betrayed her. No sound came. only silence. That day, the decision formed in her heart. She could not stay quiet anymore. She needed to speak to her son. When the sun set and the house grew quieter, she found her son sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. She lowered herself onto the chair across from him, her hands tight around the keys. "My son," she began softly, her voice heavy with sorrow, "I need to talk to you." He looked up, his face tired, his eyes dull. "What is it, Mother?" She took a deep breath. Her throat felt dry, but she pushed the words out. "Your wife. She is not what you think. She wants this house. She has been watching me, following me, even taking the keys when I sleep. She will not stop until she has control." Her son frowned. He folded the newspaper and leaned forward. "Mother, please, don't start this again. You always worry too much." The old woman's heart ached. "I am not imagining this. I heard her on the phone. She talks about taking the house. She stood in my room at midnight, staring at the keys. She smiled when I caught her. You must believe me." But instead of concern, her son's face hardened. His voice grew sharp. "Enough. She is my wife. She has done nothing wrong. Why do you always look for faults in her? Do you want to ruin my marriage?" Tears filled the old woman's eyes. Her lips trembled. "I am telling you the truth. She is planning something. Please, you must open your eyes before it is too late." Her son rose to his feet, his face red with anger. "I don't want to hear another word about this. You are old and you are letting your fears control you. She is my wife and you will respect her." The words struck her harder than a slap. She sat frozen, unable to breathe. Her own son, the boy she had raised, the child she had sacrificed everything for, had turned away from her. He had chosen his wife over his mother. She lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. The keys in her hand felt heavy, almost useless. For the first time, she felt truly alone in her own house. From that day, the atmosphere in the home grew darker. Meals were no longer shared with warmth. The daughter-in-law sat proudly beside her husband, her eyes sometimes darting toward the old woman with a smug gleam. The son never noticed or pretended not to. Neighbors began to whisper. They heard the raised voices, the slamming of doors. One neighbor even asked gently, "Is everything all right in your home?" But the old woman only forced a smile and nodded. How could she tell them that the war was not with outsiders, but with her own family? The old woman spent more time in her room clutching the keys, her back hunched with sorrow. The walls that once gave her comfort now felt like they were closing in. Even the air inside the house felt heavier, harder to breathe. And then came the night that broke her heart even more. She had stepped out of her room to get a glass of water. The hallway was dim, the shadows long. When she returned, she found her door closed. She reached for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. She twisted it again, harder this time, but it was locked from the inside. Her heart dropped. She knocked softly at first, then harder. "Open the door," she cried, her voice trembling. No answer. The silence on the other side was deafening. Her hands shook as she knocked again, louder, desperate. "This is my room. Open the door." She pressed her ear against the wood, her breath uneven. From inside she thought she heard a faint laugh. A cold, cruel laugh that chilled her to the bone. The old woman stepped back, her chest heaving. Her keys were in her hand, but they meant nothing now. Her own room had been taken from her. She looked around the dark hallway, her shadows stretching long under the weak bulb above. For the first time in her life, she felt like a stranger in her own home. The door opened slowly, the hinges creaking like a whisper in the dark. The old woman stood frozen in the hallway, her breath caught in her throat. And there she was, her daughter-in-law standing in the middle of her room. Her arms crossed, her smile sharp and cold. "Looking for something?" the younger woman asked softly, her voice dripping with mockery. The old woman's fingers tightened around the keys in her palm. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it might burst. "Why are you in my room?" she asked, her voice trembling. The daughter-in-law stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the keys. "Because everything in this house will be mine, sooner or later." including that room, including those keys. The old woman shook her head, her lips quivering. This is my home. I built this life with my own hands. You have no right. But her words only made the younger woman laugh softly, cruelly. No, right? I am your son's wife. What belongs to him belongs to me. And soon everyone will see that you are just an old, weak woman who has lost her place. The old woman felt her knees weaken, but she stood her ground. I will not give you the keys. The daughter-in-law's smile vanished. Her face hardened, her voice sharp as a blade. You will. If not today, then soon. Because I don't wait forever, and neither does he. She brushed past the old woman, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway, leaving the air heavy and suffocating. The old woman stood in the doorway of her own room, staring at the space that had once felt safe, now tainted by shadows of betrayal. That night, sleep did not come. The old woman lay awake, clutching the keys so tight they dug into her palm, leaving marks on her skin. Every sound in the house, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through the window made her jump. When the sun rose, she went to the kitchen, hoping for a moment of peace. But peace did not come. Her son was there, sipping tea, and beside him sat his wife, her head resting gently against his shoulder. Her expression soft and sweet, the perfect act. The old woman hesitated, then sat down across from them. Son, she whispered, her voice shaky, we need to talk again. His eyes narrowed. Mother, I told you before. No more. The old woman's tears threatened to fall, but she swallowed them back. She is trying to take everything from me. Please listen. She told me last night. She said this house will be hers. Her son slammed his hand against the table, making the cups rattle. Enough. You are imagining things. She would never say that. But the daughter-in-law only lowered her gaze, hiding a smile that the old woman caught. The old woman's voice broke. Why can you not see it? Why do you not believe me? Her son stood, his voice thunderous. Because there is nothing to believe. You are old, Mother. Maybe your mind is playing tricks. Stop accusing my wife, or I will have no choice but to make you leave this house yourself. The words pierced her chest like a blade. She sat in silence, her body trembling, while her son stormed out of the room. The daughter-in-law rose slowly from her seat. She leaned across the table, close to the old woman's ear, and whispered, You see? He is mine. And soon your house will be mine too. You cannot stop me. The old woman shivered, her tears falling at last. Her heart ached, not just from fear, but from the unbearable truth her son had chosen her enemy. The days that followed grew darker. The daughter-in-law no longer bothered to hide her cruelty. She would move things from the old woman's room, take her belongings, and laugh when confronted. She made sharp comments at the dinner table, words heavy with poison. While the son sat in silence or defended her, the old woman felt trapped like a prisoner in her own home. Even the neighbors noticed how thin she looked, how her eyes had lost their spark. They asked her if she was all right, but she only nodded. She could not share her shame. And then, one evening, it happened. The old woman was sitting in the living room folding her shawl when her daughter-in-law stormed in. Her eyes burned with fury, her chest heaving. She stood over the old woman and shouted, Give me the keys. Now the old woman's heart stopped. No, she whispered. The younger woman's hand struck her cheek with a sharp, stinging slap. The sound echoed through the house. The old woman gasped, her hand rushing to her face. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at the woman who had just crossed the final line. The daughter-in-law leaned down, her voice low and dangerous. This is your last warning. The next time, it won't just be a slap. The old woman sat frozen, the sting of betrayal burning deeper than the pain on her skin. She realized then that the house she had once filled with love had turned into a battlefield, and the war had just begun. The door creaked open, its rusty hinges groaning in the silence. The old woman sat frozen on the couch, her cheek burning red from the slap. The keys shook in her hand, rattling softly like dry bones. Her son stepped inside, his shoes tapping against the tiles. He stopped when he saw them, his wife standing tall, her face still flushed with anger, and his mother trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The old woman's heart pounded in her chest. She lifted her tearful eyes toward him, whispering with hope, "You saw it, didn't you? She hit me. She struck me." But her son's gaze shifted, first to his wife, then back to his mother. His jaw tightened and his fists curled at his sides. The daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice soft, fragile, as if she had been the victim. "She's lying. She attacked me first. I only defended myself." The old woman's body jolted. "What?" she cried. "That is not true. I did nothing. She demanded the keys, and when I refused, enough." Her son roared, his voice echoing through the house. The old woman flinched, her body curling inward. She stared at him in disbelief. "You believe her over me? Your own mother." His chest rose and fell heavily. His eyes darted between the two women, but when they finally settled, they landed on his wife. He walked over to her side and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. The old woman's heart cracked into pieces. "You're making this house unbearable, Mother," he said, his tone sharp, final. "You accuse her again and again. You twist every little thing into some story. I can't take it anymore." Tears blurred the old woman's vision. "You think I am lying? After all, I have given for you. After all, I have sacrificed." Her son's face softened for just a flicker of a second, but then hardened again. "I love you, but you are making me choose. And I will not lose my wife." The old woman's body went numb. His words pierced deeper than any slap, any wound. She had raised him with her own hands, fed him when she had nothing herself, worked through nights to give him a future. And now he stood across from her, not as her son, but as her judge. Her daughter-in-law lowered her head, hiding a smile of victory. The old woman saw it, even if he did not. The rest of the evening passed in suffocating silence. She sat alone in her room, the keys pressed against her chest like a fragile shield. She could hear their voices in the next room, his gentle words, her soft laughter. Every sound was like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. That night the old woman could not sleep. She kept replaying his words, "I will not lose my wife." The house she had built now felt like a cage. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to whisper betrayal. Every creak of the floorboard carried the weight of her loneliness. The next morning she tried again. At breakfast, she placed her trembling hand on her son's arm. "Please, my child, just listen once more. You know me? I would never lie. She wants this house. She will destroy us all if you keep turning away." Her son pulled his arm back. His voice was calm, but colder than winter. "If you cannot stop, Mother, I will send you away. You understand? I can't live like this anymore," the old woman gasped. "Send me away? This is my house." But her daughter-in-law only poured tea into his cup and said sweetly, "We should think about peace, for all of us." The old woman stared at them, her body trembling. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You? You are planning something together." Her son pushed his chair back and stood. "Enough. One more word, and I will make sure you leave this house for good." The sound of his footsteps faded as he left the room, leaving only the old woman and her daughter-in-law. The younger woman leaned across the table, her voice sharp and low. "You heard him? You are nothing now. The next move is mine, and you will not stop it." The old woman sat paralyzed, her tears dripping into her lap. She felt the walls closing in, the floor sinking beneath her. She was trapped alone, betrayed, powerless, but deep inside a flicker of something stirred. A faint spark. If no one believed her, she would have to fight back on her own. That night, as the house grew quiet, she made her choice. She would hide the keys somewhere no one could find them. Somewhere even her daughter-in-law would never think to look. Her hands shook as she crept through the hallway, clutching the keys tightly. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting pale shadows across the walls. She moved silently, her heart racing. But just as she reached the place she had chosen, a floorboard creaked behind her. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned her head. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that made the old woman's skin crawl. The moonlight spilled through the tall window, laying pale silver stripes across the floor. She stood clutching the keys to her chest, her heart beating so fast she thought it might give her away. And then she saw her daughter-in-law, standing at the end of the hallway, half her face hidden in the shadows, half glowing under the moonlight. Her eyes burned with hunger, her lips curved into a cruel smile. So the younger woman whispered, her voice carrying easily through the silence, "You are going to hide them from me." The old woman's throat went dry. She held the keys tighter. "They are mine. This house is mine. You cannot have them." The daughter-in-law began to walk forward, slow and steady, each step echoing against the wooden floor. "Don't be foolish. You are too old to keep fighting. You cannot stop what is already decided." The old woman backed away, her shoulders hitting the wall. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "This is my home. I will never give it up. Not while I'm alive." The younger woman tilted her head, her smile vanishing. "Then maybe," she whispered, her eyes narrowing, "you should not be alive." The words sliced through the silence like a knife. The old woman's knees weakened, but she refused to fall. "You would not dare," she murmured, but her voice was barely more than a breath. The daughter-in-law stepped closer. So close the old woman could smell the sharp sweetness of her perfume. "Wouldn't I? Who will believe you? Who will protect you? Your own son stands with me. You are alone." The old woman's tears welled, blurring her vision. Her body shook, but her spirit burned with stubborn strength. "I still remember the day I built this home," she whispered. "I carried bricks with these hands. I bled for these walls. You will never take it from me." The younger woman's expression twisted into rage. Her hand shot out, grabbing the old woman's wrist, squeezing hard. The keys clinked in her trembling hand. "Give them to me." She hissed at the old woman, struggled, trying to pull back. The metal dug into her palm, her skin breaking, but she refused to let go. "Never." The struggle grew violent. The sound of metal scraping against skin, the heavy breathing, the soft thud of feet shifting on the wooden floor. Of it filled the silent house. And then the daughter-in-law shoved her against the wall, the force knocking the air out of her chest. Pain shot up her back, but still she held on to the keys with everything she had. Her voice cracked as she cried, "Help! Someone help me!" But the house stayed silent. Her son did not come. No footsteps, no voice. Only the shadows, watching. The daughter-in-law leaned close, her face inches away. "Scream all you want. No one will save you." The old woman's strength faltered. Her hands grew weak, the keys slipping between her fingers. She closed her eyes, whispering prayers under her breath, begging for protection. At that moment, something shifted. Somewhere inside, a hidden strength stirred. With the last of her will, she shoved her daughter-in-law back, breaking free from her grasp. The younger woman stumbled a step, eyes flashing with shock and fury. The old woman staggered away, clutching the keys tightly to her chest, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. She stumbled into her room, slammed the door, and locked it from the inside, her back pressed against the wood, her body shaking uncontrollably. From the other side, she heard it, the slow, steady knock of her daughter-in-law, knock, knock, knock. Knock. Each sound was calm, deliberate, like a hunter tapping on the cage of its prey. "Open the door," the younger woman's voice sang softly. "You can't hide forever. One way or another, the keys will be mine." The knocking stopped. Silence stretched out again. The old woman sank to the floor, hugging the keys as if they were her very life. Her tears soaked her hands, her whispers filling the room. "God, please give me strength. Please keep me safe." For hours, she sat there, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. Every sound outside her door, the wind, the creak, The faint rustle made her body jolt. The night dragged on endlessly, heavy and suffocating. But when the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, she dared to believe it was over, that maybe she had survived another night. And then, just as the sun rose, she heard the front door open. Her son's voice echoed through the house. "Honey, I'm home." The old woman froze. What would her daughter-in-law tell him this time? What lies would she spin? Would he believe her again? Or would he finally see the truth with his own eyes? The morning light crept slowly through the cracks in the old woman's curtains, painting pale lines across the floor. Her body was heavy with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. She had stayed awake all night clutching the keys, listening to every sound outside her door, and now her son was home. She pressed her ear against the wooden door, straining to catch every word. At first, their voices were soft. Her daughter-in-law's tone was low and trembling, like a woman on the verge of tears. "She tried to attack me again," she whispered. "I don't feel safe in this house anymore. I can't live like this." The old woman's heart sank. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. Lies. All lies. Then came her son's voice, firmer than usual. "Enough is enough. I cannot keep living between you two. Something has to change." Her breath caught. Was this the moment he would finally see the truth? Was this the moment he would protect his mother? She pressed harder against the door, her nails digging into the wood. Maybe it's time. He continued slowly, for her to leave this house. For everyone's peace. The word struck her like a blade to the chest. She stumbled back from the door, gasping, clutching her chest as though she had been stabbed. Leave this house. My house. The home I built brick by brick with my hands. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the keys clinking in her trembling hands. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. She felt the walls of her room closing in, the very air pressing down on her chest. Through the haze of her tears, she heard her daughter-in-law's soft, fake sobs. "You're right, my love. I can't live in fear anymore, please. Do something before it's too late." The old woman pressed her hands against her ears, trying to block out the sound. But the words had already carved themselves deep into her soul. Moments later, footsteps approached her door. Her son's voice came firm and commanding. "Mother, open the door." She froze, her body stiff. "Mother, it's me. Open it." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "No, I can't. Not if she's with you." A pause. Then his voice grew sharper. "We need to talk. Enough is enough." Her body shook violently. Every instinct screamed that danger waited on the other side. She clutched the keys tighter, whispering prayers under her breath. Then the handle turned. The door shook. He was trying to force it open. "Mother, stop this nonsense." Her sobs grew louder. "Please, my son, don't do this. Don't take her side again. She is lying to you. She wants everything. She will destroy Ma'and. She will destroy you, too." For a moment, silence followed. The old woman dared to hope. Maybe her words had reached him. Maybe, finally, he would see Dot. But then his voice returned, colder than ever. "If you cannot live with us in peace, Mother, then you must go, today." The old woman's breath caught in her throat. She felt her entire world collapse in that single sentence. Her son, the boy she had carried in her arms. The child she had fed when there was no food for herself. The man whose future she had built with her own blood. And sweat was throwing her out of her own house. The keys slipped from her trembling hands and fell to the screen floor with a sharp metallic clink. Dot from outside. Her daughter-in-law's voice rang, calm and victorious. "See? She can't even hold on anymore. It's time." The old woman's tears blurred everything. She crawled across the floor, picked up the keys with shaking hands, and pressed them to her chest as though they were her last breath of life. Her voice cracked as she cried, "You will regret this, my son. One day you will see the truth. One day you will know what she really is." But the door shook again, harder this time. "Mother, open it now. Don't make me break it." Her heart hammered in her chest. She backed away from the door, her body trembling violently. She looked around the room, her eyes darting wildly. The walls seemed to close in, the air grew thick. And a strange thought filled her mind if she stayed here. She would not survive this night. The knocking turned into pounding. "Mother, open it!" Her body shook from head to toe. She staggered to the window, pulling aside the curtain. The morning light spilled onto her face, warm and fragile. For a moment she wondered if this was the last time she would see it. Behind her, the door rattled again, harder than before. The old woman clutched the keys in both hands, whispering prayers, her tears falling like rain. She knew the moment was coming. A storm was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The sound of the wood splitting was sharp and cruel, like bones breaking. The old woman flinched as her son's shoulder slammed again against the door. Dust fell from the frame, and the old lock rattled, straining to hold on. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out every other sound. She clutched the keys tightly in both hands, pressing them against her chest as if the cold metal could protect her. Her lips trembled with prayers, whispered into the stale air of the room. "Mother?" Her son's voice roared, fierce and impatient. "Open this door before I break it down." Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice came out clear, though weak. "This house is mine. Mine? I've built it with your father. I gave my blood and bones for it. And you, my son, you would throw me out." For her, a cold silence followed, broken only by the sound of her daughter-in-law's sharp voice. "Dripping with poison, she's lost her mind. End this now. Take the keys or we will never have peace." The old woman staggered back until her frail body pressed against the far wall. The door shook violently again. The sound was like thunder rolling through her chest. Her knees buckled and she nearly collapsed. But something inside her, some last spark of strength, kept her standing. "I still remember that night," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The night I first held you in my arms, my son. You were so small, so helpless. I promised then that I would protect you from every danger in this world. And now the danger is inside my house." The door splintered, a jagged crack slicing down the middle. Her son grunted with effort. One more push and the barrier would give way. The old woman's tears fell freely as she whispered, "If you step inside, you will no longer be my son. You will be hers." A deep silence followed, and for a moment she thought her words had reached him. She thought maybe, just maybe, the boy she raised still lived inside. The man on the other side of the door. But then came the final blow. The door burst open with a deafening crack, the wooden frame shattering into pieces. Her son stumbled inside, sweat glistening on his brow, his chest heaving. Behind him, her daughter-in-law stepped into view, her lips curled into a satisfied smile, her eyes shining with triumph. The old woman gasped, retreating further into the corner, the keys trembling in her hands. Her son's eyes flickered between her and the keys, his jaw clenched, his face torn between guilt and resolve. "Give them to me, mother," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's time." Her body shook violently, but she did not move. She held the keys tighter, her voice breaking. "No, never. These are not just keys. They are my life, my past, my soul. If you take them, you take everything I am." Her son's hands tightened into fists. He took a step forward. She raised her trembling arm, pointing at her daughter-in-law, her voice rising with a sudden surge of strength. "And you devil, you will never stop until you destroy me. But one day, the truth will burn you. One day, he will see what you really are." The daughter-in-law's smile widened. She leaned closer to her husband and whispered, loud enough for the old woman to hear, "If she will not give them, take them." Her son hesitated. His eyes flickered with something: pain, doubt, or maybe shame. But then, slowly, he stepped forward, reaching out his hand. The old woman's knees gave way, and she fell to the floor, clutching the keys tightly to her chest. Her sobs echoed through the room, raw and broken. He knelt before her, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. His voice cracked almost like a child's. "Forgive me, Mother." And with a sudden, sharp tug, he pulled the keys from her frail hands. The sound of the metal slipping free was like a final bell tolling in the silence of the house. The old woman cried out, a cry so full of pain it seemed to shake the very walls. She collapsed onto the cold floor, her hands empty, her body shaking with grief. Her daughter-in-law stepped forward, resting her hand on her husband's shoulder. Her voice was soft, victorious. "You did the right thing. Now we can finally live in peace." But there was no peace in the old woman's heart. She lay on the ground, staring at the broken door, at the family she no longer recognized. Her tears blurred her vision, but her words came out steady, almost calm, like a curse spoken into the air. "This house will remember me," she whispered. "Every wall, every brick, every shadow will carry my pain. And one day, when you least expect it, you will hear me again." Her son's eyes filled with tears, but he turned away, unable to look at her. Her daughter-in-law guided him out, the keys clinking in her hand. The old woman was left alone in the broken room, the morning light spilling across her empty hands for the first time in her life. She felt like a stranger in her own home, and as the silence settled, she whispered into the emptiness, "My son is gone. My home is gone. Only my tears remain." If you listened to my story till the end, thank you. I shared it because pain becomes lighter when we speak it out loud. If you felt my sorrow, or if you have faced something similar in your own life, please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story so more people can hear it, and so no one feels alone in their pain.